Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the museum. So good to be back doing some virtual programming, although I must say I'd much prefer if we were doing them in person. But it's good to see you all for our programming in their own words. We are currently, I do want to say, we are currently in the middle of our annual membership drive held every September. If you are not a member, now is the time to join. Sign up in September and your new membership will be extended by 3 months. It's easy and relatively painless to do. Click on the membership tab in our RehobothBeachMuseum.org and sign in. Today, we are doing In Their Own Words with Steve Elkins and Murray Archibald. And today, before we start the video, I'd like to introduce Robert Thompson, who is our oral history project manager, just to give us a little info about the history of oral histories at the Rehoboth Beach Museum. Robert?
Good afternoon, and thank you for tuning in. In brief, the Rehoboth Beach Historical Society Oral History Project began in May of 2007. Procedures were established to interview long-term area residents for the purpose of recording and then transcribing their stories. A grant was written by Violet Shillcoat, who was then the chair of the Oral History Program, to the Delaware Heritage Commission. The grant was obtained from the commission, and it covered half of the funds needed. The other half was funded by a contribution from Warren McDonald, who was a member of the society. Since the project began, it's been expanded and upgrades have been made. We now have a little over 100 oral histories on file. A new digital camera has been purchased to replace the original video recorder. And this new camera gives us more flexibility in the area of transcription, editing, and downloading the edited oral history to the web. I hope you enjoy this insightful oral history of Steve and Murray from 2010. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Okay, let me let a few more people in that are in the waiting room, and then we will start the video. Okay. And I don't know why Mary Beth is having problems, but anyway. Okay, screen share. Why is this doing it? Why don't do this to me? There we go. Share sound. And we're ready to go.
Today is Tuesday, November 2nd, 2010, and I'm in the office of Camp Rehoboth in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. Today I have the pleasure to be speaking with Murray Archibald and Steve Elkins. Murray, would you be so kind as to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background?
I'm Murray Archibald. I grew up as a Southern boy in Alabama, the son of an Alabama preacher, Methodist preacher. Actually, there are Methodist preachers on both sides of my family. So some of them are in Georgia, some in Alabama. But was an artist and an actor and enjoyed all of that. And so ended up, moving away from the South at some point. But it's been interesting to me coming to Rehoboth because it started as a Methodist church campground. So I always felt there's this thread running through my life. But I made it here because I met Steve, and we ended up coming to Rehoboth as vacationers many years ago.
Steve, would you introduce yourself, please?
Sure, I'm Steve Elkins. Currently, I'm the Executive Director of Camp Rehoboth, which is the Gay and Lesbian Community Center in Rehoboth Beach. I moved from Atlanta, Georgia, where I grew up. I moved in 1976 with Jimmy and Rosalind when Jimmy Carter was elected president. I worked first in the transition offices in Washington and then into the White House. That was, 32 years ago, 33 years ago, 34 years ago? Goodness, we're getting older than we think. That was my first experience of actually even coming to Washington, was when I came up with the Carter administration. I worked there until January 21st, 1981, when Mr. Reagan was inaugurated. And at 12:01 p.m., I was no longer part of the White House. But we stayed in Washington. Murray and I met in 1978, actually in the White House. He came visiting with a friend who was bringing a painting to hang in my office, and she asked if I would clear herself and another gentleman, and then she called back and said, also clear in Murray Archibald, who's visiting. I'll never forget, I said, sure, is he okay? And she said, oh yeah, he's real nice, you'll like him. 30 minutes later, it was history. So 32 years ago this September is when we met in the White House. So.
Then after your meeting, where did your careers take you, and where else did you live before you came to Rehoboth?
We actually left Washington. I left the White House and went to work for a bank holding company in St. Louis. And Murray and I, 3 weeks after deciding to live together, we headed off to St. Louis, where we spent a year before I was asked to come back and work on the Carter re-election campaign. I came back and traveled with Bob Strauss, who was chairman of Carter's re-election campaign. He had been chairman of the Democratic National Committee. I spent a year traveling with Strauss, and then, as I say, after President Carter was defeated, we stayed in Washington and in computer cells. I went into computer cells, and in the next 8 years, I was transferred 5 times. So we went from DC to Manhattan to something we called the S word, Syracuse, from there to Norfolk, and then from Norfolk back to Manhattan. And then in 1990, decided we didn't want to be weekenders in Rehoboth, we wanted to live here full time. So that's sort of how we got here. Murray, as an artist, I was very fortunate that I would call and say, I got a little promotion, and he would say, where are we going and when are the movers coming? So that's how we ended up here.
That made it a lot easier because I was at home at the time. But
Prior to moving here, how was it you first discovered Rehoboth Beach?
Steve had come while he was at the White House before I met him a couple of times, just for
a weekend,
short visits.
just for a weekend.
And that first year we were back in D.C., a friend of ours said, let's get a share for the summer. I'd never been here at all. And so sometime in the spring, we jumped in the car and we drove over, and I knew nothing about it, but we rented a house right behind the Christian Science Church on
Norfolk.
On Norfolk Street. And that was the summer even. The Blue Moon was open that summer, but they didn't have the bar open yet, I don't think. So things were just beginning to sort of start happening.
And what year was that?
That was 81. 81, yeah. And then so we would play croquet on the church lawn and after the beach. I remember that. Set up a blender in the driveway, and then people would come over and play croquet. It was fun.
Those were the days when you'd come home from sitting on the beach all day and you'd get out those starched Oxford cloth shirts and roll up the sleeves and your starched shorts, and you'd go out and play croquet in the afternoon. People don't dress quite like that anymore. I mean, those were the days that even places like the Summer House, you couldn't go in there if you had a t-shirt on.
I know I got thrown out of the summer house in that
refused
first year
entry.
or so. No, they wouldn't let me in because I had a t-shirt on. It was a nice t-shirt, but it was...
But a t-shirt nonetheless.
We should go look at their dress code.
Right. Well, you remember places, even the Renegade, which was a gay dance club, when it opened, you couldn't wear tennis shoes. You know, this
There were
was,
dress shoes.
there were dress codes for those places. Women, or no hats were allowed. I'll never forget, there was a woman that was trying to get in and had a turban on, and they wouldn't let her in because she had a turban on, until finally someone explained that she had just gone through chemotherapy, and they did let her in. But it was a very conservative community, both on the straight side and the gay side. But that was 30 years ago, so.
What attracted you to Rehoboth? I mean, there are a lot of beach communities.
I think, you know, it was that family sense that, I mean, we made such great friends, and because we're connected to so many cities up and down the East Coast, you know, you've got a lot of people from Washington, but Baltimore, Philadelphia, you know, Norfolk, up it's that mid-Atlantic area.
Jersey, New
we
York.
were meeting great friends, you know, and these houses that friends were sharing with were just amazing. They were like families. And then, you know, it wasn't too long, it was about the time, actually, that we started coming here that AIDS really started to appear. And I don't think we can talk about our experience here, or even with Camp Rehoboth today, without talking about AIDS, because it changed everything. And, you know, suddenly our friends started dying, and, you know, either the ones from New York, Washington, but here too, you know, it was all over. So it was well, it just was earth-shattering, you know, it just turned the world upside down for us.
And, you know, one of the interesting things Murray talked about, that there was a sense of family here, and our family was no longer described in a traditional sense, and these were the people that you chose to include in your family. There was a bumper sticker when we first moved here full-time in 1990 that said, "Keep Rehoboth a family town." And that was put out by the Homeowners Association, and we knew what it meant, that maybe we weren't welcome. Maybe the gay and lesbian community was being too demonstrative in the community, making too much of an impact. But we wanted people to know that we too wanted it to be a family town, but families come in all sizes, shapes, and orientations. You know, John Hughes was mayor at the time and was a proponent of that bumper sticker. But not too many years ago, in the last decade, he was quoted in the Washington Post as saying that if he were doing a bumper sticker today, it would say, "Keep Rehoboth a diverse town." And he credited Camp Rehoboth with people that he had met in the gay and lesbian community with helping put a face and define a community and what it really meant to be in community.
I know that Camp Rehoboth had a lot to do with AIDS activism, or preventing AIDS activism is a better term. Can you speak to some of that in regard to what occurred here?
We actually started in the late 80s. Was the first time we did Sundance, which is an event that we still do that raises a lot of money. But it started as an AIDS fundraiser. It was actually our 10th anniversary, and we thought we'd have a party and we'll ask people to make donations, you know, just to celebrate that instead of doing gifts. And so it was, you know, it was the first time. Everybody was so frustrated, they wanted to do something, and people just jumped on it, and you know, that was it. From then on, we've been doing that even longer than we've been doing Camp Rehoboth. That was in 88, and then Camp Rehoboth we started in 91.
So the impetus was really a fundraiser.
Yeah,
for...
so that, I mean, I think
funny.
that the AIDS work though it stopped us from just being here because it was fun, you know. All of a sudden things got a lot more serious, and it was almost trained us all to begin to take a look at what was going on around us, you know, and it spilled over into you know, more activism on other fronts as well. But everybody wanted to do something. It was horrifying, just that. And in those days, I don't know whether you remember, people would get sick and die very quickly, you know, and there was nothing, you know. There was a month in the early 90s when we had funerals every weekend for 4 weeks in a row, you know, of close friends. So it was terrible.
There was also a time in this particular community where churches had not gotten involved, had not taken a stand, and the business community didn't want to talk about the impact that AIDS was having in the community. And then it spread out to, well, we don't want to talk about gay and lesbian community at all. And we were confronted in the early 90s with a horrific gay bashing that happened on the south end of the boardwalk. It happened about 1 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday morning after a Saturday night, when some young, and I call them kids because they ranged in age from 15 to 19, kids came in from not too far out of Rehoboth looking for a party. They couldn't find the party they had heard about, so they said, well, let's go to the south end of the boardwalk and beat up some faggots. Excuse my French. They went looking for trouble and they found people to attack. It was a life-changing and a community-changing experience. It was the first time that the police chief and subsequently his police staff, the gay and lesbian community and the business community all came together and said, we're not going to take this. We're going to force the city officials to respond to this. And we did respond, and we came together and we said there would be zero tolerance of that type, of any kind of hate crimes. We were fortunate at the time that the chief of police, Craig Doyle, who might not have been so popular in a lot of ways, was at least very much determined that he was not going to tolerate any type of harassment. There was no hate crime legislation that included sexual orientation, but he found ways to prosecute people and to arrest them for attacks on the gay community. So subsequently then, when that legislation was passed and sexual orientation was added in 1997 to the hate crimes legislation, then Governor Carper chose Rehoboth Beach. He stood in front of City Hall, in front of the police department to sign the legislation. And I was very honored to be asked to sit at the table when that was being done. It was quite an accomplishment, but it was also an acknowledgement that we had a police chief at the time who stood up and said, no, I'm not going to take this. It's not okay.
And we still do. I mean, we still have.
Oh, and it hasn't changed since then. And that's when we started doing diversity training for the local police, first for all the Rehoboth police, but then each year since then, we've done training for all the summer police that are coming in. And it's been it used to be an adversarial type relationship where they would think we were asking for special treatment, and we would think maybe that they didn't want to respond the way that we felt they should to potential hate crimes or anything else. And now it's, hey, tell us where the best restaurants are. You know, 2 years ago I was training the police, and I asked if they knew anyone, and if maybe you have somebody in your family or you have friends that are gay or lesbian. And in years past, maybe 1 or 2 people would raise their hand. Oh yes, I do have a cousin that's gay. That particular year, 2 people raised their hand and said, well, I'm gay. A third man raised his hand and said, well, I'm not gay, but I have 2 mothers. So it was a celebration. So once again, it's a generational change, and that's what we're thankful for, but it hadn't always been that way.
Well, let me ask you to back up a little bit and tell me how you got to this point. You were, prior to coming here, you were in New York, I believe, and then you made a permanent move here in the 90s. How did that happen? And then how did all of this begin?
It's funny, I thought the last time we moved back to New York that's where we'd stay for the rest of our lives. You know, that's had been sort of our goal, was to get back to New York and settle down. And then just as the summer was ending in 90, we were here, you know, for the summer stuff, and I was walking down the street, and at this property where Camp Rehoboth is now, I saw that it was all empty and that there was a little apartment back here. And for some reason, all of a sudden, it just snapped in my head, and I thought, you know, we could live there. We could be fine. I like being in the city, but this is sort of like a little tiny bit of the city, you know. And
it's like a movie set.
Yeah, Steve and I, the whole property at 39, we're actually on the 30, what was 37, what is 37 Baltimore, but Camp owns the property at 39 now. But
That's
in
right.
those days, that whole property, which is part of the courtyard now and was several stores, was all vacant. And so we foolishly rented the entire, not just one part of it, we rented the whole thing, thinking, well, we can do some fun things in it, great things, we'll get something started here. And you know, later we gave up that lease, but eventually Camp ended up buying it. But we, that was the year we started Camp, and we brought people together to, I think it had to do with the fact that so many gay people were coming to Rehoboth, that there had to be something that tied things together, because we didn't want it to be an adversarial thing. We just wanted to be part of the community, and there was some growing pains, you know, and obviously for everybody, I think, of how do you adjust to this, and Rehoboth has such a unique character with its, you know, young families and gay people, and you know, and its conservative roots as a church camp and all sorts of things. So that's how we
And Camp,
started there.
in Camp Rehoboth, Camp is an acronym for Create a More Positive Rehoboth. That's why you always see it in capital letters, the Camp part. And we started it because we wanted to be part of creating a positive environment. We didn't want it to be an adversarial relationship. I love Key West, I love Provincetown, I love Fire Island, but they're pretty much segregated communities from the gay and lesbian and the straight community, or historically had been. We wanted to build a safe and inclusive community with room for all. We wanted Rehoboth to live up to the meaning of its name. And so we started Camp for lots of reasons. The Create a More Positive part of it, the fact that Rehoboth was a church camp to begin with, and the sort of historical sense of camp in the gay and lesbian community of being campy, being fun, being something that you do. And most of us grew up going to the beach or going to somewhere in the summer as a camp. So it all just rolled into one.
So this was your idea. You're inclusive, both you and Murray.
It was our idea to start something. Murray is the creative side that came up with the idea of the camp part. So I'm not going to take any credit for that. But we started it 20 years ago and brought in friends, started talking about the concept and what we thought this could do in the community. And first couple of years, it was actually difficult because we had people that were passionately involved that thought we should be an activist organization and we should be saying, no, this is what we're going to do, and almost an in-your-face organization. I was always a proponent, and Murray, of we can get a lot more accomplished when we look at what we have in common as opposed to what we have that are differences, and that we should be an umbrella organization that helped people become part of a greater community. We didn't need to worry about gay, straight, resident, non-resident, summer visitor, any of the other. We needed to find the areas where we could work together.
And early on, Letters from Camp Rehoboth is our magazine, and it was out on the street too for, you know, everybody to read. So I think that gave us a great voice back then, and people started picking that up and finding out what was going on.
Tell me some of the best of times and your most difficult challenges.
It's hard to know where to start. It's been the biggest learning experience of my life, or probably for both of us. And part of that is, I guess anytime you start something from the ground up, you just have to continually going through growing pains with it. And now there's even a name for it now called founder syndrome. You know, founder syndrome, as we begin to address, you know, what happens to the organization after we're gone, because a lot of people still associate the two of us with it, and we still, you know, do lead it. So those are issues, but there were good times in there, and I don't.
There haven't been too many bad times. Yeah. The worst time, and Murray talked about it a little bit before, the worst time was so many of the people that have been instrumental in helping us start this whole movement in Rehoboth died. And there were people that were so close to us, so it was very hard. That was the difficult part. In 95, 96, when several people that had been part of our beach house or had been friends that had come in that were so a part of this town in the social scene and in the activist scene as far as getting things done, they died, and they died much too young. So that was the hard part.
It does keep things in perspective, though. You know, there was something about starting it all at that intensity and that kind of, I don't know. I don't know whether we would have had the tenacity and the courage to keep going at times if not for the things we learned those days, if not for those people, our friends.
You know, and there was, in the late 90s, I guess, or 97, 98, there was a time where there was a Philadelphia television station, they were doing a news magazine. It was called The Bulletin at the time. And they came down to talk about Rehoboth in the gay 90s. And a couple of the commissioners were quoted as saying, oh, well, those gay people have their own agenda. And as I said, I was quoted as saying, we wanted Rehoboth to be a family town, but families come in all sizes, shapes, and orientations. And I'll never forget, they interviewed a family and that had been coming to Rehoboth for years, and this young boy, 11-year-old boy, said, gay, straight, who cares? I just want to go to the beach. And the commentator closed the program saying, won't it be nice when we all feel that way? So those were times where we thought we had made an impact and an inroad, and then you hear some of the commissioners saying they thought we had our own agenda, which was opposite from the city's. So you get thrown back a loop, and then you hear a child say, let's just go to the beach. Let's just have a good time. And it's amazing because now we have a commission that is fully integrated as far as sexual orientation. And you know, I've told people over the years that when we started Camp Rehoboth, Rehoboth was an island of tolerance in a sea of homophobia. And now we're an island of tolerance in a sea of outlet malls. You know, times have changed, and we all seem to be working together for other greater needs and greater interests. But you still have to stay vigilant that hate creeps in all too often, and too many things that so many people do.
And it sounds like you had some very clear goals when you started. And as time has passed on, you've accomplished those, it seems to me. Could you tell me where you started from a goal perspective to today? Here we are almost 20 years later. What are you looking forward to at this point for the future?
For us or for Camp Rehoboth, or for both?
I somehow see you so intertwined.
Yeah, I can't separate it. I can't separate it. It's hard to. And we're actually working, we have a long-range planning committee here that's doing some strategic planning, and a lot of those questions are certainly coming up and will be all winter long. We started it, simply enough, I think, to make it a better world around us. And if you look at our mission statement, it includes a number of things like that, and there's a pretty broad umbrella, actually, that we're going to, work by doing a number of different things. And we have done that. Trying to figure out what the next step is it's not always easy. Especially in light of things like, recently we've been hearing a lot about teenagers who have been bullied and committed suicide and everything. And I think that organizations like this that are in grassroots areas can make a difference. Can make a difference in the community because we've worked through all the other organizations, not because we were even trying to do something, just by being a part of them and believing in their causes as well. We can work with the YMCA, we work with with all sorts of city and organizations and the churches, but not because we're going in to say we're going to change the church, because we're going in and say we're here. What can we do? You know, it's not an agenda that way. It's just to be a part of things. And I think when people do that, neighbor to neighbor, that things change. As to where we go next, I don't know.
Well, I think if you look back at our original mission statement and what Camp Rehoboth, the purposes of our organization, we have continued to do that. It's continued to make a safe and inclusive community with room for all. And we've looked at the ability to work with other organizations in helping them with their fundraising. We work closely with the Rehoboth Beach Film Society for the film festival and other events, with the YMCA, with the Wellness Center at BB, with BB Medical Center itself. One of our partnerships that we're really excited about over the last 2 years has been with the Westside New Beginnings Community Center in West Rehoboth. And that's been exciting because we've been really working closely with the kids there and helping them discover some talents that they might not have been aware of yet. And so it's been everything from photography to cooking. We did a workshop with them this summer about, it was called Manners Matter. And it was not only sitting down at a table how to eat, but how to shake hands with somebody, how to introduce yourself, not only to that person, but then to introduce your family to that person. And we learned so much from it. It's really amazing, out of the mouths of babes, how you learn so much when you see the interaction we've had with, and the impact that we're having on their lives, hopefully, and that we know they're having on our lives. So that's been a really exciting part in working with. And we work with other health organizations in town, but also in the religious community, not only with the Christian community, but with the Jewish community that's here, and with others, in being willing to put a face on the gay and lesbian community for those churches and those religious institutions. And I think that's been an important part.
Steve and I are involved at Epworth. It was right here on the street for so many
Epworth
years.
Methodist Church.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And but when we started, and we were the first, I think, that we joined the church, and
We certainly weren't the first gay people.
no, we're
there,
not the
but we were
first there. We're the first ones to
identify as
have
a
our
gay couple.
pictures in the directory
Definitely the
together
first to
and
do
stuff. And so Epworth went through the whole process of what this means to open their doors to everybody. And you know, some people left, and others, more people came, and eventually, I mean, this is 15 years later, 16 years later. You know, Epworth is it's called Reconciling Congregation. So they've made a choice to say, we open our doors to all people and sexual orientation, whatever. And that's a break from the Methodist churches, the main Methodist church, which has still got some language that needs to be rewritten, we think, but is not welcoming. And most of the churches in this area have gone through that. Well, maybe not to that extent, but most of the churches, at least right downtown, have opened their doors to everybody. You know.
It just strikes me in listening to you that you have reached out to so many elements of the total community, and you've touched not only so many organizations, but so many individuals. And the Camp Rehoboth, to me, has become not only a facility for the gay and lesbian population, but for everyone. I know I came here last week to get my flu shot.
If you notice our logo, if you look around, you see the house with the heart on it, is with the heart in the middle. We actually, part of our mission, it was added to the mission later. Once we started talking about the physical space here, we did some workshops to develop a new vision for this building. And part of that vision was to be the heart of the community. And so that's where that logo comes from. And we sort of interpret that to mean that there's so many ways that we can reach out, and that you try to you try to help wherever you can. You know, it doesn't matter who people are, and it's amazing the questions that people come here with that would shock everyone. I think that because we get such a wide variety of things, but part of that vision also included a statement that said that the Camp Rehoboth Community Center is a gift to the community as a whole, and will be. So that was our hope
This
at that time.
room that we're sitting in, which we added almost 2 years ago, about a year and a half ago, functions as a large meeting space that's available to people throughout the community. And we have had everything from commitment ceremonies to memorial services on that side, those types of events, private birthday parties, to the Homeowners Association. We had the candidate forum last year for persons running for city commissioner. It was held here.
The
Governor
governor.
Markell was here last summer to sign a piece of legislation which added sexual orientation into the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. He stood on this stage in this room and signed that legislation. We had approximately 150 people in this room and another 100 standing out in the courtyard with speakers out there for him to sign that. We've had everything from the Delmarva Piano Festival in this room to a chef's cook-off that we had in cooperation with Main Street last year, and film festival. The Film Society's had events here. So we've tried to make it a space that really was a community space and it was available for all types of things and uses.
When we're finished, I'd like to make sure we include on the video this space. The impetus for this space, just give me a little history. This is a whole addition to your facility.
In 2000, about that time in 2000, we started, as Murray said, workshops and committees talking about expanding Camp Rehoboth into a full community center. We've been a community service organization, but we're operating out of a small little store in the back of property at 39 Baltimore. And we talked at the time about whether we would raise money and go out on the highway, go further out into the county, build something, build a community center. And that's when we really came up with the idea that we wanted to stay in Rehoboth and be the heart of the community. At that time, we were able to raise enough money to secure a down payment and buy the property at 39 Baltimore Avenue, which is connected to this. And we moved into the front building shortly thereafter, and with the properties in the back, the stores and apartment, we're able to help pay the mortgage. And then 5 years later, this property at 37 Baltimore, which had been private residence when we first moved here, and then Peter Antolini had it as a gourmet food store, and then it had been a restaurant for a few years called Our Place Garden Restaurant. The women that owned that wanted to sell the restaurant, close the restaurant and sell the property, and we were able to put enough together for Camp Rehoboth to buy this property as well. But this area that we're sitting in now was just a garden area in the back. It had a little canopy over it, but they had used it in the summertime to seat people. And we still needed a space, a facility that would be somewhere between the convention center and space you can rent at one of the local hotels, that type of thing. We needed some small meeting space, we thought, in town, and a space where people could come together and have all types of meetings and things. And that's when we continued to say we still want to be the heart of the community. And so it all grew quickly. Unfortunately, that was right at the height of the bubble. So our fundraising, luckily we're in a town and a community that is still extremely generous. So our fundraising continued, and the ability to manage that growth, the addition that we added on. You start with an architect and it's one price, and by the time you get around to building it, it's a lot more. It's always a lot more, as everyone knows. But we've got a very generous community that's allowed us to keep our mission in the front and also grow our program areas, and that's the important part.
Murray and Steve, you've given us a very comprehensive history on yourselves and Camp Rehoboth, and I know there's a whole lot more. We only have an hour to capture this, but are there any other stories that you'd like to share with us?
I do. I have one that it's always kind of fun to me that we talk about Camp Rehoboth, and we know what CAMP is, and as I said, it's an acronym for Create a More Positive Rehoboth, but when people call information looking for a campground in Rehoboth, they quite often get our phone number. So over the years, we learned that we needed to have by every phone in the office a list of campgrounds, because invariably you call and someone calls and asks about tents or RVs, and we tell them that we're not a campground, we're a community service organization. Most of the time they say, well, that's okay, tell me about the campground. So we found it's much easier to have a list of campgrounds. But for years, I was guilty of, or being a little chicken to say, we're a gay and lesbian organization. So I would just say we're a community service organization. Finally, about 3 years ago, I answered the phone one day, and there was a woman calling, and from her voice, she sounded like she was probably in her mid-80s or so. She was a little bit elderly, and she said, my granddaughter is coming to visit for 2 weeks this summer, and I was wondering if there was anything she could do at camp while she's here. I took a deep breath and said, ma'am, we're not a campground, we are, and she said, I know what you are, you're a gay and lesbian community center. My granddaughter's a lesbian, is there anything she can do while she's here? And I thought, wow, we've come full cycle. When I was brave enough finally to say it, and I didn't even have to, that somebody knew what we were in the organization. So I consider that a victory.
I hate to tell you, but it's been a lot longer than 3 years.
Well,
since I can tell you that. You're losing track of time here. You just reminded me, though, a minute ago of a story that it was a couple of years ago when we officially opened this building. We did a dedication event and had a huge crowd in this room. There were all many donors and volunteers and community people that had all come together. And as part of it, I'd written a little litany that sort of incorporated to be the heart of the community, which is a part of our vision for this building. And so I would say a statement, and then the room would say, to be the heart of the community. And I don't remember how the whole litany went, but so we were well into that when suddenly a little boy who's a friend of, a child of some friends of ours, was sitting on the side of the stage, suddenly piped up with, is this a prayer? And it was just in the moment a lull, and it floated across the whole room, and everybody heard it. And I was just about to say the next phrase, and I stopped and said, sort of smiled and said, yes, Frank, I guess it is. And everybody just applauded and applauded and applauded, because I think he was able to tap in that moment to the fact that it was a great dream of so many people, and so many people had worked to.
Now, something we were giving thanks.
Yeah, and it was a thankful moment there. It's not so.
And, we're thankful that we had a vision, we had an idea that happened to come at the right time for a community that we love so much. That's all I can say.
Mm-hmm.
We started, as we said, coming here 30 years ago, and started Camp Rehoboth 20 years ago. It's been an experience where we all sort of grew up with so many people that now I didn't have quite so much white hair when we started doing this. And not too many years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, we were not the only people that started worrying that where's the next generation? Maybe this town has priced itself out of the market for a lot of people, and so many of us that had come in as part of group houses, and whether you're gay or straight, a lot of people here came as weekenders to start with, and then we claim this as our own. Even if you're not here all the time, you claim it as it's a home of sorts for everybody that's here. And we were really getting worried about it. In the last 2 years, so we've seen an influx of young people coming back. All of a sudden, house shares have started again, and people that are finding their ways in town and making this part of their life experience. And the extended families that we talked about, they're making those families too. So those of us who have been here for a long time and have tried to do some things, we need to reach out and incorporate this group.
All the new folks.
All the new folks.
That was really exciting this summer.
And to know that that's the way that we're going to continue what we've started, is to embrace the young and the new. And so what if they're walking along with their iPads and their iPhones and their iPods and all this kind of stuff and not paying any attention to what we think is important? We need to realize that it's all important.
Challenge.
It is a challenge, isn't it?
University. And what you have done is you have established a culture here, and that it's important to embrace new people into that so that they understand the norms and the values and the culture, the environment they're in.
Right, right. You know, and I hope if as one of the founders and having been so intricately involved with the philosophy and the heart of camp, I think, over the years, that's what I hope we don't lose. You know, I hope that people who come after us keep that heart and are able to remember why we started, and not just let it get swallowed up in trying to do everything else. But you know, that's been important to me, and in some ways it's always felt like I guess this is my Methodist son's, preacher's kid's son coming back to me, but it's always felt like a calling in a way. You know, and I was not a minister, but in some ways I feel that I have done that here to a certain extent. And I don't know if that sounds like it's, but in a way it is my, you know, and that's my family background speaking there, I guess, that I can say things like that. But you know, I've felt really strongly about it over the years, that, and sometimes that goes back to the first time I saw this property. It seemed like it was just sitting there waiting, my whole mind changed because, you know, I said earlier that I thought we'd never leave New York, but then suddenly, okay, we can go there, we can do this, and it just seemed right. And it's always seemed right somehow to me to be here. So,
Well, you and Steve have made an incredible difference in this community. I really want to thank you for that.
Thank you.
thank you.
This was a pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, I have not a lot to say other than how much I've enjoyed it, and I hope everybody else has also. Murray is with us today. If anyone has any thoughts or comments they would like to share, please feel free to and Murray, do you have anything that you would like to add? When this has been 12 years ago, almost now, 11 years ago, and sadly, Steve is no longer with us. But I just really enjoyed seeing this again. And Murray?
It was, you know, I was kind of excited because just to hear Steve's voice, and it was a bit more emotional than I thought it would be. I'll say I thought I was doing better than that, but you know, it's not that it's sad. It's sort of joyful for all the times we had together, and I'm really glad you have this recording because it just sums up so much, and you know, of where we were at the time. And there's so many of Steve's favorite stories in there. I loved hearing them one more time. You know,
Yeah.
Many of course, all of them I've heard many times, but yeah, I'm glad you have this. I'm glad you did it at the time you did.
Yeah, I'm so glad that we have this for forever now. So, anyone, any thoughts, any comments, please unmute yourself. Violet, can I put you on the spot? Did you enjoy? You have to unmute. You have to unmute yourself, Violet.
Duh.
It
Thank
bet it brought memories back to you also.
Oh, it's we made just the opposite move, Murray, from you and Steve. Bruce and I left Rehoboth. We're now in New York City. I'm right here and I can see Central Park at a distance. But when I look at this, I'm just so struck by how generous you both were. In that interview was sharing so many wonderful explanations of what occurred and why it was necessary. It's just a treasure. And I'm pretty sure if you talk to Bob, wherever he is, Bob,
Right here.
oh, there he is. He can probably find a way to give you a whole transcription, if not a copy of the actual.
They have one. He has
You
one.
do? We'll talk. But so that you have it personally to pass on. Thank you for me. You were the easiest people I had to interview. If anybody else is there, I apologize.
Thank you, Violet. I had almost forgotten so much of it until I reread it again recently, and I just what a great experience you made it for us. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. To me, it's a treasure, and as we spoke earlier, it's a gift you give back to a place you love.
Very good. Thank you, Violet.
Thanks.
Okay, well, if there are no more comments or thoughts, all I can say is thank you. And thank you, Murray, for being here with us today. I just so appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Goodbye, all.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Okay. I thought we would too.
I'm going to mute.
Okay, that's.